The steady beeping of the heart monitor was the first sound I heard as I drifted back to consciousness. My throat felt raw from the intubation tube, and the harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room made me squint. I'd performed countless surgeries in this same hospital, but being on this side of the operating table was different. Through my anesthesia-induced haze, I could make out Olivia's face, my best friend and our hospital administrator, standing by my bedside. Something was wrong. I could tell by the way she was holding her tablet, knuckles white against its protective case. "Becca," she said softly, using my nickname instead of my professional, Dr. Mitchell. That's when I knew whatever she was about to tell me was personal, not medical. "There's something you need to know about Nathan. My husband of 12 years was supposed to be here when I woke up. He'd promised, just like he'd promised to be there for every other important moment in our marriage. But the recovery room was conspicuously absent of his tall frame and characteristic cologne. He sent these to the hospital's legal department an hour into your surgery." Olivia's voice cracked as she turned her tablet toward me. Through my blurry vision, I could make out the official letterhead of Preston and Wallace, one of Seattle's most expensive divorce firms. The words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," swam before my eyes. My husband had served me with divorce papers while I was unconscious, having my own life-saving surgery. The same husband who'd kissed me goodbye this morning, telling me everything would be fine. The same man who'd held my hand through my breast cancer diagnosis 3 months ago, promising we'd face it together. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want to thank you for being here. If you're connecting with this journey, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's part will reveal the shocking discovery I made about Nathan's real estate empire and the woman he'd been building it with behind my back. The timing wasn't an accident. I understood that with devastating clarity even through my post-operative fog. As a pediatric surgeon, I knew exactly why he'd chosen this moment. In Washington state, major medical procedures can impact divorce proceedings. He'd waited until I was at my most vulnerable, technically incapacitated, before making his move. "There's more," Olivia said, placing her warm hand over my cold fingers. "Dr. Foster wanted me to tell you that the board received a formal complaint this morning, challenging your fitness to perform surgeries given your recent diagnosis." The implication was clear. Nathan wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to destroy the career I'd spent 15 years building. I closed my eyes, remembering the previous evening. Nathan had insisted on cooking dinner, something he hadn't done since our first year of marriage. He'd made my favorite pasta, opened an expensive bottle of wine I couldn't drink because of my pre-surgery restrictions. He'd been so attentive, so caring. Now I realized he'd been saying goodbye while setting up his attack. Olivia pressed the nurse's call button, probably worried about my increasing heart rate. "James is already looking into the complaint," she assured me, referring to Dr. Chen, our chief of surgery. "We all know it's bogus. Nathan won't get away with this." The recovery room door opened, and Maya Patel strode in, her detective's badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. I'd worked with her on child abuse cases, her expertise as a private investigator proving invaluable in protecting my young patients. "I came as soon as Liv called," she said, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "You remember that real estate deal Nathan's firm was celebrating last week? The one with the suspiciously high commission rates? I think I know why he's moving so fast with this divorce." The pieces were starting to come together, even through my medicated haze. The late-night phone calls he claimed were about zoning, regulations. The mysterious business trips that always seemed to coincide with real estate conferences. The new marketing director, Victoria Blackwood, whose presentations Nathan insisted on rehearsing personally. "I need a lawyer," I managed to whisper through my dry throat. "Not just any lawyer, someone who knows real estate fraud," Olivia smiled, and for the first time since I'd opened my eyes, I saw a glimmer of hope in her expression. "Already done." Sophia Richardson is waiting for your call. She's handled 3 cases against Preston and Wallace this year alone. Won all of them. Maya pulled out her notebook. Nathan thinks he's being clever, serving papers while you're under anesthesia. But he just gave us the first piece of evidence about his character and tactics. In my experience, men who choose moments like this for maximum vulnerability usually have a lot more to hide. I thought about the joint accounts I'd noticed Nathan accessing more frequently lately. The new offshore investment portfolio he'd insisted would help fund our retirement. The way he'd encouraged me to focus on my recovery rather than our finances. He'd been planning this for months, probably longer. As the post-surgery medications began to wear off, my mind was becoming clearer. I might be in a hospital gown, connected to beeping monitors and IV drips, but I wasn't powerless. I'd spent my career making split-second decisions with children's lives in my hands. I'd fought my way through medical school, residency, and fellowship while building one of the most respected pediatric surgery practices in the Pacific Northwest. Nathan had just made a serious miscalculation. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger. "Let's show my husband exactly why you don't serve divorce papers to a surgeon while she's in recovery, especially when you've been committing real estate fraud with your marketing director." Maya's eyebrows shot up. "What makes you think there's fraud?" I managed a small smile, remembering the document I'd seen on Nathan's desk last week, the one he'd quickly flipped over when I'd brought him his forgotten phone. Because Victoria Blackwood isn't just his marketing director. She's listed as the owner of shell companies that have been buying up properties across Seattle. Properties that Nathan's firm then resells at suspiciously high profits. I may have been distracted by cancer treatments, but I'm still a doctor who knows how to read between the lines. Olivia squeezed my hand. "I'll have James postpone your follow-up surgery schedule. You're going to need time for this fight." Looking at these 2 strong women standing beside my hospital bed, I felt something shift inside me. Nathan thought he'd struck a devastating blow, but he'd forgotten something crucial about surgeons. We do our best work when everything is on the line. 3 days after being discharged from Northwest Memorial, I sat in my home office, surrounded by files I'd never paid attention to before. The house felt different now, hollow, like an empty operating theater after hours. Nathan had moved into a downtown condo, claiming he wanted to give me space to recover. His clothes still hung in our closet, designer suits and casual wear, mingling as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Maya's initial investigation had uncovered something interesting about Victoria Blackwood. Before becoming Nathan's marketing director, she'd worked for 3 other real estate development firms across the West Coast. Each one had faced SEC investigations shortly after her departure. "It's a pattern," Maya explained, spreading photographs across my desk. "She moves in, sets up shell companies, helps divert funds, then disappears before anyone catches on." The doorbell rang, interrupting our discussion. Olivia entered, carrying takeout from our favorite Thai place and a thick manila envelope. "Sophia Richardson sent this over," she said, placing the envelope beside the photos. "It's everything her firm has gathered on Preston and Wallace's divorce tactics. Apparently, they have a history of targeting spouses during medical procedures or family emergencies." I opened the envelope, medical training helping me organize the information systematically. Case after case showed a pattern, serving papers. During cancer treatments, major surgeries, even one instance of notifying a wife during her mother's funeral. "They're trying to catch people at their weakest," I observed, surgeons' fingers tracing the dates and details. "That's not all," Maya added, pulling up financial records on her laptop. "Remember those offshore accounts Nathan set up for retirement? They're linked to a series of property purchases in Victoria's name. Small commercial spaces, all bought just below market value and resold within months at massive profits." The numbers swam before my eyes, not from medication this time, but from sheer disbelief. Millions of dollars had moved through these accounts, carefully concealed behind legitimate-looking real estate transactions. I remembered Nathan's insistence that I focus on my recovery rather than our finances. "Let me handle everything," he'd said, that practiced concern in his voice. "You just focus on getting better." My phone buzzed, a message from Dr. Foster about the complaint against my surgical privileges. The board had scheduled a review for next week. Nathan's timing wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. If he could get my medical license suspended, even temporarily, it would impact my ability to fight back. "He's trying to paint me as unstable," I said, realization dawning. "A surgeon with cancer, emotionally compromised, unfit for the operating room." That's why he filed the complaint right after serving the papers. Olivia pulled out her own laptop, typing rapidly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Already ahead of you. I've got statements from every department head attesting to your competence. James Chen has compiled success rates from all your surgeries this year. They're exemplary, even during your treatment. Nathan's trying to play a game in our territory now. A notification popped up on my screen, an email from Christine Walsh, name vaguely familiar. Reading it made my blood run cold. She'd been married to one of Nathan's former business partners, gone through a similar divorce 3 years ago. Her husband had claimed she was emotionally unstable, unfit to manage their joint assets. She'd lost everything, including their home. "This is bigger than just Nathan and Victoria," Maya said, reading over my shoulder. "They've done this before, using the same playbook, but Christine Walsh didn't have what you have: medical records, proving your competence, a hospital administration backing you, and evidence of their real estate fraud." I walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline Nathan had always been so proud of. How many of those buildings were part of his scheme? How many other lives had he and Victoria ruined while building their empire? The sound of more cars pulling up made me turn. Dr. James Chen was walking up our driveway, followed by Daniel Harrison, the hospital's chief legal counsel. They hadn't waited for an invitation. This was what real support looked like. "Becca," James called out as I opened the door, his normally calm surgeon's demeanor charged with purpose. "We found something in the hospital's financial records. That new pediatric wing Nathan's firm was contracted to build? The budget numbers don't match city records." Daniel spread blueprints across my dining room table, pointing out discrepancies. "They've been inflating costs, skimming from hospital funds? The materials listed here? They're premium grade, but what's been delivered is standard. The difference is nearly $2 million. The pieces clicked together in my mind, years of watching Nathan work suddenly making terrible sense. He'd pushed so hard for that hospital. Contract insisted his firm was the only one that could deliver what we needed. I'd supported him, vouched for him to the board. He'd used my reputation, my relationships, to further his scheme. My hands didn't shake as I reached for my phone, surgeon's hands, steady under pressure. "Maya, I need everything you can find on Victoria's previous firms. Daniel, get me those construction records. Olivia, pull every email Nathan sent regarding the pediatric wing project. James, we'll need a full audit of the materials actually used in construction." They moved with medical precision, each understanding their role. Nathan had thought serving divorce papers during my surgery would weaken me. Instead, he'd activated a network of professionals who understood evidence, who knew how to work under pressure, who valued precision and truth. Christine Walsh arrived an hour later, bringing her own files, her own stories. Other names emerged, more victims of Nathan and Victoria's schemes, more lives disrupted. But they hadn't faced opponents like us before. They hadn't realized that a surgeon's attention to detail, a hospital administrator's organizational skills, and a detective's instincts could unravel years of careful deception. "The board meeting," Olivia said suddenly, looking up from her Laptop. Nathan's complaint about your fitness to practice. He timed it to coincide with the next phase of the pediatric wing construction. If you're suspended, you can't oversee the project, can't spot the discrepancies. I felt a familiar clarity settle over me, the same focus that descended in the operating room when faced with a complex case. Then we move first, I declared, reaching for my coffee. Maya, how quickly can you get those SEC reports from Victoria's previous firms? Daniel, draft a letter to the Construction Oversight Committee. James, I need you to schedule an emergency department meeting. The sun was setting over Seattle as we worked, casting long shadows across the files and photos spread throughout my house. Nathan had chosen his moment carefully, thinking surgery and cancer would leave me vulnerable. He'd forgotten that doctors are trained to spot patterns, that hospital administrators know every regulation, that surgeons learn to turn fear into focus. Tomorrow, I would face the medical board, not as a victim, but as a surgeon who had uncovered serious fraud. Nathan thought he was delivering a killing blow to our marriage. Instead, he'd given me the key to exposing everything. But first, we needed to ensure every detail was perfect, every piece of evidence secured. Because in surgery and in justice, precision matters. The medical board meeting room felt colder than any operating theater I'd worked in. 7 senior physicians sat before me, their expressions carefully neutral as they reviewed my case files. Nathan's complaint about my fitness to practice lay prominently on the central table, his lawyer's elegant letterhead a stark contrast to the medical records surrounding it. Dr. Mitchell, Dr. Eleanor Wright, the board chair, began, "Your surgical record remains exemplary, even during your recent treatments. Can you explain why your husband feels your judgment has been compromised?" Before I could respond, Sophia Richardson, my lawyer, placed a thick folder on the table. Perhaps Mr. Cooper's concern for my client's judgment arose when she began asking questions about certain financial irregularities in the hospital's construction projects. The room shifted perceptibly. Dr. Wright's eyebrows rose as she opened the folder. Inside were the documents Maya had uncovered, detailed comparisons between the materials Nathan's firm had billed for and what had actually been used in the pediatric wing construction. As you can see, Sophia continued, her voice precise as a surgical instrument, Dr. Mitchell's attention to detail extends beyond the operating room. These discrepancies were noticed during her regular project oversight, a responsibility she maintained even during treatment. Dr. Foster leaned forward, examining the construction photographs Maya had taken. These support beams, they're not the grades specified in the contract. His eyes met mine, understanding dawning. The complaint was filed the day after you requested the original building specifications, wasn't it? I nodded, feeling the same calm that descended during difficult surgeries. The timing wasn't coincidental. Neither was serving me divorce papers during my procedure. Nathan needed to discredit me before I could bring these issues to the board's attention. The evidence was irrefutable. Photographs showed cheaper materials than what had been billed. Invoices revealed inflated costs. Email trails documented Nathan and Victoria's careful orchestration of the scheme. But it was Christine Walsh's testimony that truly shifted the atmosphere in the room. 3 years ago, Christine began, her voice steady. My ex-husband worked with Cooper Development on similar projects in Portland. When I noticed discrepancies in the accounts, Nathan Cooper advised my husband to question my mental stability during our divorce proceedings. The pattern was clear. Nathan had refined his tactics over years, using medical or emotional vulnerability to silence those who might expose his schemes. But he'd never targeted a surgeon before. He didn't understand that our training teaches us to work through personal crisis, to maintain focus when lives are at stake. Maya slipped into the room as Christine finished speaking, passing a note to Sophia. My lawyer's eyes widened slightly as she read it, then handed it to me. Victoria. Blackwood had just booked a flight to the Cayman Islands, scheduled for tomorrow morning. They're running, I thought. remembering Nathan's insistence on maintaining separate overseas accounts. But Maya's investigation had already frozen those assets, thanks to the evidence of fraud. Victoria's attempted escape would only serve as further proof of guilt. Dr. Wright cleared her throat, drawing attention back to the matter at hand. Dr. Mitchell, this board finds no merit in the complaint against your surgical privileges. In fact, we're deeply concerned about the apparent attempt to use hospital resources for personal retaliation. Relief flooded through me, but there was no time to savor it. My phone buzzed with an urgent message from Olivia. Nathan had been spotted entering the hospital's administrative offices, presumably to retrieve documents before they could be examined. He's desperate, Maya whispered as we hurried down the corridor. Men like him, they can't handle losing control. He'll try to destroy evidence, cover his tracks. But Nathan had forgotten something crucial about hospitals. Everything leaves a trail. Every document accessed, every file opened, every door entered was logged and recorded. His own desperate attempts to conceal evidence were only creating more. We found him in the records room, Victoria beside him, both frantically searching through files. They froze when they saw us, Nathan's face contorting with an emotion I'd never seen before: fear. "It's over, Nathan," I said quietly, noting how his expensive suit couldn't hide the perspiration on his forehead. "The board has dismissed your complaint. The SEC has been notified about the construction fraud. Christine Walsh and others are coming forward." Victoria moved first, trying to push past us with a stack of documents. Maya blocked her path, badge glinting. "Those records are evidence in a federal investigation now. Adding theft and destruction of documents to fraud charges won't help your case." "You don't understand," Nathan began, using the same persuasive tone that had convinced so many investors. "The pediatric wing project, it's more complicated than it looks. We were trying to save the hospital money, find creative solutions. By stealing from sick children?" Olivia's voice cut through his excuses. She'd arrived with hospital security, her tablet displaying more damning evidence. "We've found similar discrepancies in every project your firm handled. The cancer center renovation, the emergency department expansion, all of them show the same pattern." Nathan's composure cracked. "You were supposed to be focused on your recovery," he spat at me. "Too weak, too distracted to notice. That's why we timed everything." "For my surgery?" I finished for him. "When you thought I'd be most vulnerable? You forgot something, Nathan. Surgeons don't have the luxury of being vulnerable. We're trained to focus through personal crisis, to keep our hands steady even when our world is shaking." Security officers moved forward, escorting Nathan and Victoria from the records room. Through the window, I could see reporters gathering. In the parking lot, alerted by the inevitable leak of such a prominent developer's arrest. "The DA wants to meet tomorrow morning," Maya said, carefully documenting the files they'd tried to remove. "The SEC is sending investigators. This is going to be big, Becca. Nathan's firm handled projects for hospitals across 3 states. Olivia touched my arm gently. "Are you ready for what comes next? This will be public, messy. Everything you've built." "Everything I've built is based on saving lives," I interrupted, my voice firm. Nathan tried to corrupt that, to use my position to facilitate his fraud. He thought serving me divorce papers during surgery would break me. Instead, it gave me clarity. Looking around the records room, at the evidence of Nathan's schemes, scattered across tables and floors, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. He had chosen this battlefield, a hospital, my domain, where every detail matters and nothing stays hidden forever. Maya's phone buzzed with updates. More victims were coming forward, more projects showing evidence of fraud. Nathan's carefully constructed empire was crumbling, exposed by the very vulnerability he thought he could exploit. "Your next surgery is scheduled for Thursday," Olivia reminded me, ever the efficient administrator. "Will you be—" "I'll be ready," I assured her, flexing my surgeon's hands. After all, that's what we do. We heal, we repair, we make things right. Nathan thought he could use my profession against me. He never understood that it's not just what I do, it's who I am. The district attorney's office hummed with early morning activity as Sophia Richardson guided me through a maze of cubicles. My surgeon's coat felt out of place among the suits and blazers, but I'd come straight from an emergency appendectomy. Life, and saving it, didn't stop for legal proceedings. 6 more hospitals have come forward, Sophia explained, spreading files across the conference room table. Each one contracted Cooper Development for major renovations. Each project shows the same pattern of fraudulent billing and substandard materials. Assistant District Attorney Mark Reynolds entered, carrying his own stack of documents. His eyes widened slightly at my surgical attire. Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. We've just received some concerning information about the children's cancer ward renovation. The images he laid out made my hands clench. Load-bearing walls built with inferior concrete, electrical systems that didn't meet code, ventilation units recycled from older buildings but billed as new. In a general ward, these would be serious violations. In a cancer ward, where immunocompromised children needed pristine air quality, they were potentially lethal. This isn't just fraud, I said, medical training taking over as I analyzed the implications. This is endangering vulnerable patients. The infection risk alone makes it criminal negligence, Mark finished. We're adding charges, but there's more. Your husband's firm had a specific pattern when targeting hospitals. They looked for facilities with board members or administrators dealing with personal issues, health problems, family crises, anything that might distract from proper oversight. Maya arrived, bringing security footage from Northwest Memorial's parking garage. The timestamps showed Nathan meeting Victoria late at night, long before they claimed their relationship began. But it was the documents they exchanged that caught my attention. Those files? I leaned closer to the screen. The labels. Those are patient records. They were accessing confidential medical information to identify potential targets. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Nathan hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd violated the fundamental principle of medical privacy. He'd used vulnerable patients and their families as pawns in his scheme. Sophia's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Nathan's attorney is requesting a meeting. Apparently, he has information about other parties involved in the fraud. He's trying to make a deal, Maya observed, her investigator's instincts sharp. Probably planning to throw Victoria under the bus, claim she masterminded everything. But Victoria had already outmaneuvered him. While we met with the DA, she was giving her own statement across town, detailing how Nathan had orchestrated similar schemes in multiple cities. The careful facade of their relationship crumbled as they rushed to betray each other. A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Dr. Foster entered, looking grave. Becca, you need to see this. We've found evidence that Nathan accessed your medical records, not just during your recent surgery, but going back months. He knew about your cancer diagnosis before you did. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Nathan had seen my test results, understood my condition, and planned accordingly. He'd timed everything. The divorce, the complaint against my surgical privileges, the attempt to discredit me, around my illness and treatment schedule. There's something else, Dr. Foster continued. Remember those clinical trials you were initially excluded from? We found emails suggesting Nathan intervened, convinced the review board you weren't a suitable candidate. He needed you sick, vulnerable, for his plan to work. The betrayal transcended personal hurt, entering a realm of calculated cruelty that took my breath away. As a doctor, I'd sworn to do no harm. Nathan had weaponized medicine itself against me. Maya's laptop pinged with an alert. Nathan's overseas accounts showed recent activity, attempts to transfer funds blocked by the federal freeze. He's getting desperate, she noted. Making mistakes. His lawyer's request for a meeting isn't about making a deal. It's about buying time while he tries to hide assets. Let him try, Sophia said, her legal expertise sharpening her words. Every attempted transfer, every hidden account he accesses, just strengthens our case. The judge assigned to your divorce proceedings specializes in financial fraud cases. A commotion outside drew our attention. Christine Walsh had arrived with more former clients of Cooper Development. Each carried evidence, documents, photographs, emails showing how Nathan had exploited their vulnerabilities, used personal crises to mask his firm's criminal activities. They all followed the same pattern, Christine explained, laying out a timeline. Nathan or Victoria would identify someone in a position of authority going through difficult times. They'd offer support, become confidants, while systematically undermining their ability to oversee projects. The scale of the deception was staggering. Hospitals in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, all targeted during periods of administrative vulnerability. Nathan hadn't just built a real estate empire, he'd created a predatory system that profited from others' suffering. Dr. James Chen rushed in, still in surgical scrubs. The Architectural Review Board just finished their preliminary inspection of the pediatric wing. The structural issues are worse than we thought. We need to evacuate certain sections immediately. The surgeon in me took over. How many patients need to be moved? 32, including 15 from oncology. We're coordinating with other hospitals, but the logistics... I'll handle it, I interrupted, already reaching for my phone. Olivia can expedite the transfers. We need to prioritize the most vulnerable patients, maintain isolation protocols for the immunocompromised ones. Mark Reynolds watched this exchange with growing concern. The evacuation adds another layer to the criminal charges. Willfully endangering patients, especially children, will end his career and his freedom, Sophia finished. But first, we need to ensure everyone's safety. As if to emphasize the urgency, my pager beeped, a cardiac emergency requiring immediate surgery. The investigation would continue, but saving lives took precedence. Go, Maya urged, understanding. The call of duty. We'll coordinate with the DA's office, keep building the case. Nathan thought he could use your profession against you. Let's show him how wrong he was. Heading to the operating room, I felt an odd sense of clarity. Nathan had tried to break me using the very things that made me strong: my medical training, my commitment to patients, my ability to function under pressure. Instead, he'd given me the tools to expose his crimes. The surgical scrub room provided a moment of reflection as I prepared for the emergency procedure. Nathan had planned everything around my surgery, thinking it would be my weakest moment. He never understood that for surgeons, the operating room isn't a place of vulnerability. It's where we're most focused, most capable, most alive. My phone lit up with one final message before I entered surgery. Victoria's lawyer had submitted her complete testimony detailing years of systematic fraud. Nathan's carefully constructed scheme was collapsing, exposed by the very medical system he'd tried to exploit. The emergency evacuation of the pediatric wing turned Northwest Memorial's usually quiet corridors into organized chaos. Parents clutched their children's hands while medical staff efficiently moved equipment and supplies. Standing at the nurse's station, coordinating transfers with Olivia, I watched the impact of Nathan's fraud unfold in real human terms. Sacramento Memorial can take 6 of our oncology patients, Olivia reported, her tablet displaying a complex web of hospital communications. Their isolation ward has the necessary filtration systems. Stanford's sending transport for the critical cases. A small boy in a wheelchair caught my eye, his mother trying to hide her tears as she packed his few belongings. I recognized him from last month's surgery. Tommy Matthews, 7 years old, fighting leukemia. The thought that Nathan's cost-cutting measures had exposed him to additional risks made my blood boil. Dr. Mitchell? A gentle touch on my arm pulled me from my thoughts. Angela Winters, our head pediatric nurse, held out a thick folder. We found something while clearing the storage room. Purchase orders for medical equipment, but the serial numbers don't match what was actually delivered. Maya materialized beside us. Her investigator's interest piqued. Show me. She flipped through the documents, her expression darkening. These ventilators, they're listed as new top-of-the-line models. But the ones installed are refurbished units, Angela finished. We've been having calibration issues with them for months. The maintenance logs show repeated adjustments needed to maintain proper oxygen levels. The implications sent a chill through me. Faulty ventilation in a pediatric oncology ward wasn't just negligent, it was potentially murderous. These children's compromised immune systems required precise environmental control. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Nathan's lawyer had withdrawn from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. A quick search revealed why. The lawyer's own daughter had received treatment in one of the compromised hospital wings Nathan's firm had renovated. Dr. Foster joined our impromptu meeting, his face etched with concern. The structural engineers? Final report just came in. The foundation issues extend beyond the pediatric wing. They found similar problems in the surgical suite renovated last year. I remembered those renovations, how Nathan had insisted his firm could complete them in half the usual time, at a surprisingly low cost. Now we knew why. They'd cut corners everywhere, compromising the very infrastructure meant to support life-saving procedures. Maya's phone chirped with an alert. Nathan's trying to leave the country. His passport was just flagged at SeaTac Airport. She smiled grimly. He's booked on a flight to a non-extradition country, but federal agents are already in position. That's not all, Olivia added, showing us her screen. Victoria Blackwood just turned over a hard drive. Years of documentation. Every project, every fraudulent transaction, every compromised building material. She claims it was her insurance policy against Nathan. The evidence painted a picture more disturbing than simple fraud. Text messages showed Nathan and Victoria joking about using substandard materials, calculating how much they could skim from each project before raising suspicions. They'd turned life-saving medical facilities into profit centers, gambling with patients' lives. A commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Alexander Reed, Nathan's business partner, stormed through the doors, his face flushed with anger. "Where's Becca? She needs to stop this witch hunt right now." Security moved to intercept him, but I gestured them back. Alex had been a friend, once had attended dinner parties at our home, celebrated holidays with us. I wanted to hear what he had to say. "You're destroying everything we built," he spat, waving a newspaper detailing the growing scandal. "Do you have any idea how many jobs depend on Cooper and Reed development? Do you have any idea how many lives were endangered by your cost-cutting?" I countered, keeping my voice steady. "Take a look around, Alex. These children, their families, they trusted us to provide safe spaces for healing. Instead, you and Nathan turned their hospitals into death traps." His face paled as Angela quietly laid out the maintenance logs, showing equipment failures, air quality issues, structural concerns. Each document represented a child at risk, a family unknowingly placed in danger. "I didn't know," he whispered, sinking into a chair. "Nathan handled all the medical contracts. He said the modifications were approved, that we were just being efficient with resources." Maya stepped forward, badge visible. "Mr. Reed, I think it's time we had a formal conversation about exactly what you didn't know." As security escorted Alex to a private room for questioning, Dr. James Chen arrived with more revelations. "We found hidden cameras in the hospital boardroom," he reported. "They were installed during the last renovation. Nathan was recording confidential meetings, gathering information about board members' personal lives. The method became clear. Nathan had used the recordings to identify vulnerable targets, timing his schemes around personal crises. He'd turned medical confidentiality into a weapon, using private struggles to facilitate his fraud. "There's something else," James added hesitantly. "The cameras. One was focused on your usual seat. He was watching you specifically, long before your diagnosis." The realization struck like a physical blow. Nathan hadn't just taken advantage of my illness. He'd been monitoring me, waiting for any vulnerability to exploit. Our entire marriage had been a long-term strategic position. Olivia's tablet chimed with breaking news. Nathan had been arrested at the airport, trying to board a flight to Dubai. Victoria's hard drive had proven prophetic. They'd found a go bag in his carry-on, packed with false passports and bearer bonds. The FBI's executing search warrants at all Cooper and Reed properties, Maya reported. They've already found similar surveillance equipment in 3 other hospitals. This wasn't isolated to Northwest Memorial. It was their standard operating procedure. A young resident rushed up, clutching more documents. "Dr. Mitchell, we found these in the old records room. They're insurance claims for equipment we never received, signed by." "Well, they're supposed to be signed by you." The forged signatures were perfect imitations of my handwriting. Nathan had been practicing, probably for months, preparing to make me an unwitting accomplice in his schemes. Tommy Matthews wheeled past, heading for his transport to Sacramento. He waved at me, a bright smile on his face despite everything. His mother mouthed, "Thank you," as they passed, grateful we'd discovered the dangers before tragedy struck. Looking around at the controlled evacuation, at the dedicated staff ensuring every patient's safety, I felt an odd sense of pride. Nathan had tried to use this hospital as a tool for fraud, but he'd failed to understand its true nature. A hospital isn't just a building. It's a community of healers, of people dedicated to protecting life at any cost. My pager beeped, summoning me to another emergency surgery. Even amid chaos and criminal investigations, the fundamental work of saving lives continued. Nathan had never understood that either, that for true medical professionals, the patients always come first. "Go!" Olivia urged, seeing my hesitation. "We've got this covered. Show everyone why you're still the best surgeon in Seattle. Cancer and divorce papers be damned." The federal courthouse loomed against the gray Seattle sky as I straightened my suit jacket. After weeks of emergency patient relocations and evidence gathering, the preliminary hearing for Nathan's case had arrived. Sophia walked beside me, her legal briefcase heavy with documents that would expose the full scope of Cooper Development's crimes. "The grand jury's already been selected," she explained as we climbed the stone steps. "Federal prosecutors want to focus on the hospital fraud first, establish the pattern before moving to financial crimes. Your testimony about the medical implications will be crucial." Inside the courtroom, I spotted Victoria Blackwood sitting with her lawyers, her designer outfit replaced by something more subdued. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The hard drive she'd surrendered had proven invaluable, revealing not just fraud, but a systematic targeting of vulnerable healthcare facilities. "Dr. Mitchell." Assistant U.S. Attorney Caroline Martinez approached, her expression grave. "We've uncovered something disturbing in the latest batch of evidence. Your husband didn't just access your medical records. He actively interfered with your treatment protocol." She handed me a folder containing emails between Nathan and Dr. Andrew Phillips, an oncologist at Seattle General. My oncologist. The man who had insisted my cancer required the most aggressive treatment approach, leaving me weakened and vulnerable during the crucial weeks before Nathan served the divorce papers. Dr. Phillips was receiving kickbacks, Caroline explained. Quietly. He prescribed unnecessarily harsh treatments to patients whose spouses or family members were targets of Cooper Development schemes. The more debilitated the decision-makers became, the easier it was to push through fraudulent contracts. The realization made me grip the courtroom bench for support. Every brutal round of chemotherapy, every devastating side effect, they hadn't all been medically necessary. Nathan had bought my doctor, turning my cancer treatment into another weapon in his arsenal. Maya slipped into the seat beside me, her investigator's notebook already open. We found similar patterns at other hospitals, doctors receiving consulting fees from shell companies, then adjusting treatment plans to align with Cooper Development's timeline. The medical board is launching a massive investigation. The courtroom doors opened, and Nathan entered in handcuffs, escorted by federal marshals. His expensive suit couldn't hide the toll of weeks in detention. He tried to catch my eye, but I focused instead on the young mother settling into the gallery behind us, Tommy Matthews's mother, here to testify about the ventilation failures that had endangered her son. Judge Eleanor Kwan entered, her reputation for handling complex medical fraud cases preceding her. The proceedings began with the prosecution's opening statement, detailing a conspiracy that stretched across 3 states and endangered countless patients. Your Honor, Caroline began, the evidence will show that Cooper Development didn't just commit fraud, they weaponized the healthcare system itself, turning hospitals from places of healing into instruments of exploitation. Nathan's new lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Gregory Walsh, leapt to object, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hospital blueprints showed systematic corner cutting. Equipment logs revealed dangerous substitutions. Financial records documented a complex web of kickbacks and fraudulent billing. During a brief recess, Olivia rushed in with breaking news. Seattle General just finished their internal audit. They found similar construction issues in their pediatric ward. The entire oncology floor needs to be evacuated. The pattern repeated across the country. Hospitals discovering dangerous defects, patients requiring emergency relocation, medical staff horrified to learn their facilities had been compromised. Nathan had built his empire on a foundation of endangered lives. Dr. Mitchell? A quiet voice drew my attention. Dr. Rachel Chen, a young oncologist from Portland, stood nervously clutching a stack of files. I need to tell you something about Dr. Phillips and your treatment plan. She explained how she'd questioned the aggressive protocol, suggesting a more targeted approach that would have been equally effective with fewer side effects. Dr. Phillips had dismissed her concerns, insisting the harsh treatment was necessary. Now she understood why. I tried to report it, she said, hands trembling slightly. But every time I raised concerns about patient care, construction issues would mysteriously appear in my department. Equipment would malfunction. Supply orders would go missing. The intimidation tactics were familiar, Nathan's standard approach to silencing whistleblowers. But Dr. Chen hadn't stayed silent. She'd documented everything, building a case that now added another layer to the prosecution's evidence. Back in session, Victoria Blackwood took the stand, her testimony painting a picture of calculated cruelty. She described how Nathan selected targets, using hospital board meetings and medical records to identify administrators dealing with health crises or family emergencies. It wasn't just about money, she admitted, avoiding Nathan's glare. He enjoyed it, finding people's vulnerabilities, using their worst moments against them. The more personal the crisis, the more satisfaction he took in exploiting it. My own testimony followed, clinical and precise. I detailed the technical implications of substandard materials in medical facilities, explained how compromised ventilation systems endangered immunocompromised patients, described the ripple effects of emergency evacuations on patient care. And in your professional opinion, Dr. Mitchell, Caroline asked, could these construction defects have resulted in patient deaths if left undiscovered? Without question, I replied, my surgeon's training keeping my voice steady. In fact, we're currently reviewing all adverse patient outcomes in affected facilities, looking for correlations with equipment failures or environmental factors. Nathan's lawyer tried to paint me as emotionally compromised, suggesting my testimony was colored by personal grievances. Judge Kwan shut him down quickly, pointing out that my medical expertise made me uniquely qualified to understand the technical implications of the fraud. During another break, Maya brought more revelations. The FBI had raided a storage facility rented under one of Nathan's aliases, finding years of surveillance footage from hospital boardrooms across the country. He'd recorded countless confidential meetings, gathering ammunition for future schemes. He was building a database of vulnerabilities, Maya explained, showing me photographs of carefully organized files. Every board member's personal crisis, every administrator's family emergency, all cataloged and ready to exploit. The evidence seemed endless. Each hour brought new witnesses, new victims, new revelations of how deeply the corruption had penetrated the healthcare system. Nathan sat stone-faced as his elaborate scheme unraveled, his only reaction a slight flinch when Tommy Matthews's mother described finding her son struggling to breathe in a room with faulty oxygen monitors. Looking at Nathan across the courtroom, I no longer saw the charming man who had shared my life for 12 years. Instead, I saw someone who had turned medicine, the art of healing, into a weapon, who had violated not just our marriage, but the fundamental principle of first, do no harm. The day ended with Judge Kwan ordering Nathan held without bail, citing the extensive evidence of flight risk and witness intimidation. As he was led away, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep resolve to help repair the damage he had done to countless patients and healthcare facilities. Outside the courthouse, rain fell steadily on the gathering crowd of reporters and affected families. Dr. Foster waited with news that both brightened and sobered the day. All evacuated patients were stable in their new facilities. But initial reviews suggested dozens of cases where substandard equipment may have contributed to poor outcomes. Seattle Grace Children's Hospital glowed softly in the dawn light as I pulled into the parking garage. The endless weeks of court proceedings had been interrupted by an urgent call. They'd found structural issues identical to those at Northwest Memorial. My expertise as both a surgeon and a key witness in Nathan's case was needed for the emergency. Assessment. The similarity in the defects is striking, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's chief of pediatric surgery, explained as we walked through the oncology ward. Same substandard materials, same fraudulent billing, same pattern of targeting, facilities during administration changes. The morning's inspection revealed familiar shortcuts, ventilation systems compromised by cheap filters, electrical systems that didn't meet code, support beams that wouldn't withstand a significant earthquake. Each discovery added to the growing evidence against Cooper development. Dr. Mitchell? A young nurse approached, clutching a folder of maintenance reports. We found something unusual in the operating room logs. The surgical lighting systems. They're drawing more power than they should, causing unexpected dimming during procedures. My blood ran cold. Surgical lighting wasn't just about visibility, it was about precision, about being able to distinguish subtle variations in tissue color that could mean the difference between life and death. Nathan hadn't just endangered patients in recovery, he'd compromised the operating rooms themselves. Maya arrived with FBI technicians, their equipment filling the corridors as they documented every violation. The pattern's expanding, she reported, showing me photographs from other children's hospitals across the West Coast. They specifically targeted pediatric facilities. The profit margins were higher because of specialized equipment requirements. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. The divorce proceedings had taken an unexpected turn. Nathan's lawyers were claiming that my medical condition made me an unreliable witness, that my testimony about the hospital fraud was clouded by chemotherapy-induced confusion. He's desperate, Sophia texted. The medical board just suspended Dr. Phillips's license pending investigation. Without him to corroborate the story about your mental state, Nathan's losing control of the narrative. A commotion at the nurses' station drew our attention. Elizabeth Parker, the mother of a young transplant patient, was demanding answers about the safety of the isolation room where her daughter was recovering. The fear in her voice echoed the concerns of countless parents learning their children's safe spaces had been compromised. "Mrs. Parker," I stepped forward, recognizing the need for medical expertise with a personal understanding. "I'm Dr. Mitchell. Let me explain exactly what we're doing to ensure your daughter's safety." As I walked her through the immediate safety measures and transfer plans, I saw myself in her eyes. Another victim of Nathan's calculated cruelty, but one determined to protect others from harm. Her daughter's room had the same faulty ventilation system that had endangered Tommy Matthews, installed during the same period of administrative vulnerability. "Director Martinez is on the line," Maya called, holding out her phone. "The FBI found something in Nathan's personal laptop, emails, about targeting children's hospitals specifically because of the emotional leverage it provided during negotiations. The evidence was damning. Nathan and Victoria had deliberately exploited the desperate need for pediatric medical facilities, knowing that hospital boards would be less likely to question contracts when children's lives were at stake. They'd turned parental love into a tool for fraud. Olivia arrived with more disturbing news. The National Medical Equipment Registry is showing discrepancies. Serial numbers from the devices installed here match equipment that was supposedly destroyed in a warehouse fire 3 years ago. They were installing recalled medical devices and documenting them as new. The implications staggered me. Beyond simple fraud, beyond endangering patients through substandard construction, they'd knowingly installed dangerous equipment in facilities treating society's most vulnerable members. Each revelation added new charges to the federal case. Dr. Walsh's pager erupted with urgent beeping. "The Foundation sensors just detected shifting in the East Wing. We need to start evacuation procedures immediately." The next hours passed. In a blur of coordinated chaos, moving critically ill children, transferring life support systems, maintaining sterile conditions during transport. Every medical professional in the building worked with precise urgency, understanding the stakes. Between coordinating transfers, I received updates from the legal team. Nathan's attempt to discredit my testimony had backfired spectacularly. The medical board's investigation into Dr. Phillips had revealed a broader conspiracy of doctors receiving kickbacks to adjust treatment plans, making patients more vulnerable during crucial facility negotiations. "Your Honor," I imagined Sophia saying in court, "the defendant didn't just defraud hospitals. He created a system that compromised patient care at every level, from construction to medical treatment, all to facilitate his schemes." A small voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Dr. Mitchell?" Alice Parker, Elizabeth's 8-year-old daughter, called from her transport bed. "Mom says you're helping make the hospital safe again. She says you're fighting the bad people who made them dangerous." Looking at her innocent face, trusting us to protect her during this crisis, I felt a renewed surge of determination. Nathan hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed every principle of medical care, every parent's trust, every child's right to safe treatment. Maya appeared with more files, her face grim. We found records of similar schemes dating back to Nathan's early career. Children's hospitals were his testing ground, where he perfected the techniques he later used on larger facilities. The sun was setting by the time the last patient was safely transferred. Dr. Walsh stood beside me, watching ambulances pull away under police escort. "How did we miss this?" she asked softly. "How did we let someone turn our hospitals into profit centers at the expense of our patients?" "Because he understood our vulnerabilities," I replied, thinking of my own experience. "He knew that in medicine, we're trained to trust our colleagues, to believe in the system. He used that trust against us." My phone lit up with a message from Caroline Martinez. The federal investigation had expanded to include the medical device. Suppliers who had helped Cooper Development source recalled equipment. The conspiracy reached deeper into the healthcare system than anyone had initially suspected. Looking at the empty hospital, its corridors silent for the first time in years, I felt an odd mix of sadness and hope. Nathan had tried to use my profession against me, had exploited my illness and the trust I placed in medical colleagues. But he'd underestimated the resilience of the medical community, the strength that comes from dedicating one's life to healing others. Dr. Walsh touched my arm, gently. The structural engineers need our input on the renovation plans. We're not just going to repair the damage, we're going to make these facilities safer than ever. The setting sun painted the hospital windows in shades of gold and rose. A reminder that even in darkness, light finds a way to shine through. Nathan had tried to break not just me, but the entire system of trust that medicine depends on. Instead, he'd united us in a cause greater than individual survival, the protection of those who depend on us for care and healing. Autumn rain pelted the windows of Sophia Richardson's office as we reviewed the latest developments in the case. What had started as a personal betrayal during my surgery had evolved into the largest medical fraud investigation in Washington state history. The stack of evidence on her desk grew daily, each file representing another compromised facility, another endangered patient, another broken trust. The SEC just froze 3 more shell companies, Sophia announced, adding fresh documents to our growing collection. They were registered under the names of Nathan's college roommates. "Look at this," Maya said, turning her screen to show us surveillance photos. He had private investigators following key hospital personnel, gathering leverage to use if anyone questioned his contracts. The extent of Nathan's preparation was staggering. He'd built an intelligence network within the healthcare system, using medical professionals' dedication to patient care as a vulnerability. Those who noticed problems often stayed quiet, fearing that speaking out would disrupt essential medical services. My own surgical schedule for the day had been cleared after an urgent discovery at Seattle Grace. The operating room lighting system Nathan's firm had installed contained a critical flaw, one that could cause complete failure during procedures. The hospital was scrambling to replace the equipment before allowing any non-emergency surgeries. Patricia Henderson unfolded a map on Sophia's desk, marking the locations of every hospital renovation project Nathan had overseen. The pattern was clear. He'd specifically targeted facilities in seismically active zones, knowing that structural compromises would be catastrophic in the event of an earthquake. "It gets worse," she said, highlighting certain locations. These hospitals are designated emergency response centers for their regions. If a major disaster hits, the compromised structures could fail exactly when they're needed most. A message from the DA's office brought both hope and new urgency. Nathan's attorneys were exploring plea deal options, realizing the mountain of evidence made conviction inevitable. But his cooperation would be meaningless unless we could identify and address every compromised facility before lives were lost. Dr. Foster texted an update about Tommy Matthews. His transfer to a safe facility had led to significant improvement in his condition. The proper ventilation system was allowing his immune system to recover, proving how directly Nathan's fraud had impacted patient health. Looking at the gathered medical professionals, each carrying their own story of discovered fraud and attempted whistleblowing, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Nathan had created a system that isolated individuals, making each person feel powerless to stop the corruption. But now, united by evidence and shared purpose, that same medical community was becoming his worst nightmare. The rain continued to beat against the windows as we worked, each person adding their piece to the larger puzzle of Nathan's deception. He had spent years building an empire on compromised healthcare, using my surgery as just another opportunity to silence potential opposition. Instead, he'd created the catalyst that would bring his entire scheme crashing down. The medical conference room at Northwest Memorial buzzed with tension as healthcare professionals from across the country gathered for an unprecedented meeting. On the projection screen, a map displayed every facility touched by Cooper Development's fraud. red dots, spreading across the landscape like a disease outbreak we were racing to contain. We've identified 37 critical structural issues requiring immediate attention, Dr. Sarah Martinez, head of the Emergency Response Task Force, explained. Each one represents a potential catastrophic failure in essential medical infrastructure. The room was filled with familiar faces from different hospitals, administrators, surgeons, nurses, and maintenance staff who had encountered Nathan's corruption. Many had tried to raise alarms over the years, only to find themselves isolated and discredited. Now they were united, sharing crucial information about compromised systems and dangerous equipment. The pattern wasn't random, Maya explained, highlighting clusters on the map. Cooper development specifically targeted hospitals along seismic fault lines and in hurricane zones. They knew these facilities would eventually face natural disasters, but the substandard materials wouldn't be discovered until it was too late. A hand raised from the back of the room. Dr. Mitchell? A facilities manager from San Francisco General stepped forward. We found something in our basement level that matches the time capsules from your hospital. But these contain more than just construction records. The metal box he placed on the conference table held photographs and documents dating back to Nathan's earliest projects. Maintenance workers, haunted by the corners they'd been forced to cut, had created a hidden archive of evidence. They'd known someday someone would need proof of what had really happened. My phone lit up with a message from Sophia. Nathan's legal team had made contact, offering a full confession in exchange for considerations during sentencing. He's willing to provide details about every compromised facility, she wrote, but he's demanding a private meeting with you first. The thought of facing Nathan made my surgical scar twinge, a reminder of the day he'd chosen to serve divorce papers. But his knowledge could help us identify dangers we hadn't yet discovered. Sometimes, as every doctor knows, you have to face what hurts to promote healing. Dr. Foster arrived with more disturbing news. The medical board's investigation had uncovered a pattern of targeted patient transfers. They were moving specific patients to compromised facilities, he explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Board members or administrators who asked too many questions would find their loved ones assigned to hospitals where equipment malfunctions could be arranged. The revelation sent ripples of shock through the room. Nathan hadn't just endangered patients through substandard construction. He'd actively used them as leverage to maintain his scheme. The very people entrusted with protecting patient safety had been silenced by threats to their own families. A young nurse from Portland Children's Hospital stepped forward, clutching a thumb drive. I've been tracking equipment failures in pediatric units, she said. The pattern matches the timeline of Cooper Development's renovations exactly. We didn't just lose machines, we lost children. The room fell silent as she projected her data. Each point on her graph represented a preventable tragedy, a life compromised or lost because vital medical equipment had been replaced with dangerous substitutes. Nathan's fraud had extracted a cost far beyond mere dollars. Maya's phone buzzed, with an update from the FBI. They'd discovered a hidden office in Victoria Blackwood's home, filled with recordings of hospital board meetings. She didn't just help Nathan target vulnerable facilities, Maya reported. She created detailed psychological profiles of key decision-makers, identifying who could be bribed, who could be threatened, and who needed to be removed. Olivia arrived with a stack of personnel files, doctors, nurses, and administrators who had been forced out of their positions after raising concerns about Cooper Development's work. Each career disrupted, each voice silenced, represented another breakdown in the system designed to protect patients. We need to create a central database, Dr. Martinez suggested, her emergency response experience taking over. Every incident, every equipment failure, every structural concern. We can't rely on Nathan's cooperation to find all the dangers he created. The medical professionals in the room immediately began organizing teams, pooling their knowledge of affected facilities. Years of isolated incidents suddenly formed clear patterns when viewed together. Nathan's scheme had relied on keeping people separated, preventing them from seeing the full picture. A text from Caroline Martinez added urgency to our task. The U.S. Attorney's Office had uncovered evidence that Cooper Development was still actively working on hospital projects through shell companies we hadn't yet identified. Somewhere, even now, more medical facilities were being compromised. Dr. Mitchell? Tommy Matthews's mother appeared at the door, accompanied by other parents of affected children. We've formed an advocacy group. The families want to help document everything that happened to our kids in these facilities. Their presence reminded everyone in the room why we were fighting. Behind every spreadsheet, every structural report, every equipment log were real people whose lives had been endangered by Nathan's greed. The afternoon brought more revelations. A group of medical equipment suppliers came forward, admitting they'd been coerced into participating in the scheme. Nathan had leveraged their dependence on hospital contracts, threatening to destroy their businesses if they didn't cooperate in supplying substandard materials. He created a perfect storm, Dr. Foster observed, reviewing their testimony. Everyone involved felt trapped, thinking they were the only ones compromised. Meanwhile, he was building an empire on our collective silence. My surgical pager beeped, another equipment failure in an operating room Nathan's firm had renovated. But this time, instead of isolated incident reports disappearing into administrative silence, we had a room full of professionals ready to investigate and document the connection. Looking around at the gathered medical community, I saw determination replace fear on every face. Nathan had used our professional dedication against us, knowing we would hesitate to disrupt medical services even when we suspected problems. Now that same dedication would fuel our efforts to expose and repair the damage he'd caused. A message from Sophia confirmed my meeting with Nathan was set for tomorrow. He would finally face the consequences of his actions, not just in legal terms, but in human terms. He would have to look into the eyes of someone whose life he'd tried to destroy, whose profession he'd tried to corrupt, whose trust he'd betrayed not just personally, but systematically. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the conference room windows clear enough to see the city beyond. Somewhere out there, patients were being treated in facilities Nathan had compromised, but they weren't alone anymore. The medical community had awakened to the threat, and we would not rest until every dangerous legacy of Cooper Development was found and fixed. The detention center's sterile white walls reminded me of hospital corridors, but the antiseptic smell here carried none of the hope of healing. Nathan sat across the metal table, his designer suit replaced by standard-issue clothing that somehow failed to diminish his calculated poise. Even in custody, he projected the confidence that had convinced so many hospital boards to trust him with their facilities. "You look well, Becca," he said, using my familiar name as if the past months of investigation and revelation hadn't happened. "I'm glad the treatments weren't too debilitating." The irony of his concern about treatments he'd helped manipulate wasn't lost on me. Sophia sat beside me, while Caroline Martinez observed from behind a two-way mirror. Every word would be recorded, every admission documented. This wasn't just about our divorce anymore. It was about protecting countless patients in compromised facilities. "Let's talk about Portland Children's Hospital," I began, placing photographs of faulty equipment on the table, specifically about Emily Chen, age 6, who died when her ventilator failed during post-operative recovery. Nathan's facade cracked slightly. He hadn't expected me to lead with specific victims, to force him to confront the human cost of his schemes. "That was an unfortunate equipment malfunction," he started, but I cut him off. "The ventilator was recalled 2 years before you installed it." I pushed another document across the table. "You obtained it through a shell company that specialized in acquiring discarded medical equipment, the same company that supplied similar devices to 30 other pediatric facilities." Maya slipped into the room, placing a laptop that displayed footage from hospital security cameras. Children struggling to breathe, medical staff frantically responding to equipment failures, parents watching helplessly as systems meant to save lives became instruments of danger. "You didn't just defraud hospitals," I continued, my surgeons' training keeping my voice steady. "You created death traps, knowing that eventually equipment would fail during critical moments. You turned healing spaces into hazard zones." "It was business," Nathan replied, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Hospitals have insurance, protocols for equipment failure. We calculated acceptable risk factors." "Calculated risk factors?" The words tasted bitter. Like calculating when to serve divorce papers to ensure maximum vulnerability? Like arranging for Dr. Phillips to prescribe treatments that would leave me too weak to notice the discrepancies in the hospital construction projects? His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't known we'd discovered his connection to my oncologist. Maya placed another file on the table, this one containing emails between Nathan and Dr. Phillips discussing my treatment schedule. "Tell me, Nathan, was it satisfying? Watching me struggle through unnecessarily aggressive chemotherapy while you and Victoria planned which hospitals to target next. Did it feel powerful, controlling both my illness and my recovery?" For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. The careful plans he'd crafted were unraveling, each layer of deception exposed to the harsh light of evidence. The psychological profiles Victoria had created, the surveillance footage of hospital board members, the documented pattern of targeting facilities during administrative vulnerability, all of it painted a picture of calculated cruelty. "You don't understand," he tried again. "The healthcare system is bloated, inefficient. We were introducing market corrections, forcing facilities to operate more economically. By installing defective equipment in children's cancer wards?" I spread out more photographs. Tommy Matthews struggling to breathe, Alice Parker's compromised isolation room, Emily Chen's final moments. "These aren't market corrections, Nathan. These are children who trusted us to protect them." Sophia produced the maintenance logs from Seattle Grace, showing how systematic equipment failures had endangered countless surgical procedures. Each document represented another breach of medical trust, another instance where profit had been prioritized over patient safety. "The seismic reinforcements," I continued. "Tell us about the calculations there. How many lives did you consider? Acceptable losses when an earthquake strikes a hospital built with substandard materials." Nathan's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the mounting evidence of premeditated endangerment. The structural engineer's reports were damning. Cooper Development had deliberately used inferior materials in zones known for seismic activity, creating potential catastrophes waiting to happen. "You had it all planned," I said softly, watching his carefully maintained facade continue to crack. "The shell companies, the kickbacks to medical professionals, the systematic intimidation of whistleblowers, but you made one crucial mistake." "Enlighten me," he managed, attempting to maintain his composure. "You forgot what hospitals really are. Not just buildings, not just business opportunities. They're promises we make to people at their most vulnerable moments. Promises to protect, to heal, to care. And when you break those promises, when you endanger those who trust us with their lives, the medical community doesn't stay silent." As if on cue, Maya's laptop displayed a live feed from Northwest Memorial. Medical professionals from across the country were gathered, sharing information about compromised facilities, coordinating responses to equipment failures, working together to identify and address every danger Cooper Development had created. "Your cooperation could help save lives," Caroline Martinez said, entering the room. "Every hour we spend discovering dangers you already know about is another hour patients remain at risk." Nathan looked at the faces on the screen. Doctors, nurses, administrators united in purpose. The isolation he'd cultivated, the divisions he'd exploited to maintain his scheme. had transformed into a powerful alliance against him. Victoria's already provided details about most of the compromised facilities, Sophia added, letting the implication hang in the air. Nathan's former partner was cooperating fully, leaving him to face the consequences alone. How many others? I asked, holding his gaze. How many other patients were endangered? How many other lives were compromised while you built your empire on substandard materials and fraudulent contracts? The room fell silent as Nathan stared at the evidence spread across the table. His world of careful calculations and controlled risks had collided with the reality of human consequences. The same precision he'd used to time my surgery, to maximize my vulnerability, was now being used to document every life his schemes had endangered. You wanted to see me broken, I concluded, standing to leave. Instead, you gave all of us a purpose. Every hospital you compromised, every patient you endangered will be protected. Not because of your cooperation, but despite your resistance. As I walked out of the detention center, my phone buzzed with updates from the medical response team. More facilities had been identified, more equipment failures documented, more lives potentially saved by swift intervention. Nathan had tried to use the healthcare system for profit, but he'd underestimated the strength of medical professionals united in protecting their patients. A gentle spring breeze carried the scent of blooming cherry blossoms through the open windows of Northwest Memorial's newly renovated pediatric wing. 6 months had passed since Nathan's confession, and the landscape of healthcare facilities across the country had transformed. What began as a personal betrayal during my surgery had catalyzed a nationwide movement to protect patient safety. The final inspection reports just came in, Olivia announced, spreading blueprints across the conference table. Every compromised structural element has been identified and replaced. The new ventilation systems exceed all safety standards. The renovation project had become a model for other affected hospitals. Teams of medical professionals, engineers, and safety experts had collaborated to create spaces that truly served their healing purpose. Each improvement represented another victory over Nathan's legacy of endangerment. Dr. Mitchell? A soft voice drew my attention. Emily Chen's father stood in the doorway, his eyes bright with unshed tears. They're ready to dedicate the new Emergency Response Center. The Emily Chen Memorial Center occupied what had once been Cooper Development's showcase project. Now it stood as a testament to everything Nathan had tried to destroy: medical integrity, patient safety, professional dedication. The center would coordinate responses to equipment failures and structural emergencies across all affiliated hospitals. The monitoring systems are fully operational, Dr. Foster explained as we walked through the facility. Real-time data from every piece of medical equipment, every structural sensor, every safety mechanism. No malfunction goes unnoticed, no warning sign unaddressed. Maya joined us, her investigator's notebook replaced by a tablet displaying the nationwide database of affected facilities. The FBI just closed another shell company in Nevada, she reported. That makes 43 criminal enterprises linked to Cooper Development. Each one revealed more compromised medical equipment that we've now tracked down. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, medical professionals from other hospitals learning from our response, families of affected patients joining support groups, investigators documenting the full scope of Nathan's schemes. Each person carried a piece of the larger story of betrayal and recovery. The medical board's review is complete, Dr. Sarah Martinez announced during our daily briefing. Every doctor who accepted kickbacks from Cooper Development has been identified. Their licenses are suspended pending full investigation. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. The divorce settlement had been finalized, but it felt almost insignificant compared to the larger justice being served. Nathan's assets were being liquidated to fund hospital repairs and compensate affected families. His empire of fraud was being transformed into resources for healing. Tommy Matthews's latest tests came back, Dr. Walsh reported, her face bright with genuine joy. His immune system is responding perfectly in the properly ventilated environment. He's ready for discharge next week. The success stories were beginning to outweigh the tragic discoveries. Each recovered patient, each safely completed surgery, each properly functioning piece of equipment represented a step toward healing the wounds Nathan had inflicted on the healthcare system. Patricia Henderson arrived from Portland with more recovered evidence. The network of maintenance workers who had documented Cooper Development's violations had grown into a formal whistleblower protection program. Never again would medical professionals feel isolated when reporting safety concerns. The structural reinforcement project is ahead of schedule, the lead engineer reported, showing us updates from Seattle Grace. We're not just fixing what was compromised. We're setting new standards for hospital safety in seismic zones. A group of medical students toured the facility, learning about the importance of vigilance and integrity in healthcare. The story of Nathan's fraud had become a cautionary tale, teaching future medical professionals to prioritize patient safety above all else. The preventive maintenance protocols you developed are being adopted nationwide, Olivia mentioned, showing me implementation reports from various hospitals. Every facility that Cooper Development touched is being systematically upgraded and monitored. The afternoon brought news from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Victoria Blackwood's testimony had led investigators to more hidden accounts, each one containing funds that would now support hospital improvement projects. The very money Nathan had stolen from healthcare facilities would fund their restoration. Dr. Mitchell? Alice Parker wheeled herself into view, her isolation room restrictions finally lifted. Mom says I can go home soon. She says it's safe now because you helped fix the hospital. Looking at her innocent face, I remembered the day I discovered Nathan's betrayal during my surgery. He had chosen that vulnerable moment to serve divorce papers, thinking it would break me. Instead, it had awakened a determination that extended far beyond our failed marriage. The final statistics are remarkable, Dr. Foster shared during our evening meeting. Equipment failures down 90%. Patient recovery rates improved across all departments. Infection rates in renovated areas at historic lows. Maya's tablet chimed with updates from other cities. The medical response network we'd created had expanded, connecting healthcare facilities across the country. What Nathan had tried to keep isolated, information about safety violations and equipment failures, now flowed freely between medical professionals dedicated to patient protection. The pediatric surgery schedule is fully booked, Olivia noted, reviewing the upcoming week. Parents trust us again. They know we've learned from what happened, that we're stronger and more vigilant. As twilight settled over the hospital grounds, I stood at the window of my newly renovated office. The cherry blossoms swayed gently, their pale petals occasionally drifting past the glass. Nature's reminder that even after the darkest winter, renewal is possible. Christine Walsh arrived, with final documentation from the medical equipment registry. Every compromised device had been traced, every dangerous substitution identified and corrected. The system Nathan had exploited now protected against similar schemes. We're ready for tomorrow's board meeting, Dr. Martinez confirmed, organizing reports for presentation. Every department head will share their implementation of the new safety protocols. We're not just rebuilding, we're revolutionizing how hospitals protect patients. My surgical schedule for the next day included 3 procedures in operating rooms, now equipped with the highest grade lighting systems and backup power supplies. Each surgery would be performed in an environment of absolute safety, monitored by systems designed to prevent any compromise of patient care. The evening's last update came from the FBI task force. They had tracked down the final warehouse of hoarded medical equipment, ensuring that every piece of life-saving technology Nathan had diverted would be properly restored and distributed to hospitals in need. Looking at the transformed healthcare landscape, I realized that Nathan's attempt to destroy me during my most vulnerable moment had instead created something extraordinary. The medical community had united, protocols had been strengthened, patients were safer than ever before. From the ashes of betrayal, a stronger system of healing had emerged. The federal courthouse buzzed with anticipation as Nathan Cooper stood for sentencing. 1 year had passed since he served me divorce papers during my cancer surgery, thinking that moment of vulnerability would silence me forever. Now, surrounded by medical professionals, affected families, and investigators, I watched justice unfold. Judge Eleanor Kwan reviewed the evidence one final time. Thousands of pages documenting compromised hospitals, endangered patients, and systematic fraud. Nathan stood motionless as she detailed each count, each life his schemes had impacted, each breach of trust his greed had caused. The court cannot ignore the calculated nature of these crimes, Judge Kwan declared, her voice carrying through the hushed courtroom. Mr. Cooper didn't just defraud healthcare facilities. He deliberately endangered society's most vulnerable members, turning spaces of healing into zones of danger. Victoria Blackwood had already received her sentence, 15 years with possibility of parole, reduced from 25 in exchange for her cooperation. Her testimony had proven crucial in identifying every compromised facility, every dangerous installation, every corrupted official. 35 years, Judge Kwan pronounced, silencing the murmurs in the courtroom. No possibility of parole. Furthermore, all assets will be liquidated to fund hospital repairs and patient compensation. Nathan's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. The man who had orchestrated elaborate schemes, who had manipulated medical professionals, and exploited patient vulnerability, now faced the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, Tommy Matthews sat in his wheelchair, finally strong enough to attend public events. His mother squeezed my hand, tears flowing freely. "We never thought we'd see this day," she whispered. "We never thought anyone would believe us about the ventilation problems." Dr. Foster approached with news from Northwest Memorial. The hospital's transformation had become a model for healthcare facilities nationwide. Every safety protocol, every monitoring system, every renovation standard we developed was being implemented across the country. The Emily Chen Memorial Center just coordinated its 100th emergency response, he reported proudly. Equipment failures that once went unnoticed are now addressed before they endanger patients. The system Nathan tried to corrupt has emerged, stronger than ever. My phone buzzed with messages from other hospitals. The network we'd created had expanded beyond addressing Cooper Development's fraud. Medical professionals now shared safety concerns freely, supporting each other in protecting patient welfare. The isolation Nathan had exploited had been replaced by unity of purpose. "Dr. Mitchell?" Alice Parker's voice carried across the courthouse steps. She walked steadily now, her immune system stronger in properly maintained facilities. "Mom says, you're teaching other doctors how to keep hospitals safe. Can I help? I want to be a doctor too someday." The afternoon brought more victories. The medical board announced standardized protocols for identifying fraudulent contractors. Equipment registries implemented blockchain technology to track every device from manufacture to installation. Hospital boards established whistleblower protection programs, ensuring safety concerns would never again go unaddressed. Patricia Henderson arrived with updates from Portland Children's Hospital. The maintenance workers who had documented Nathan's violations now led safety inspection teams. Their experience in identifying compromised materials and dangerous installations proved invaluable in preventing future fraud. "The insurance companies are on board," Sophia reported, showing me new policy requirements. No facility coverage without implementing the safety standards we developed. Nathan's attempt to exploit the system for profit has ironically led to unprecedented protection for patients. Maya's investigation had expanded beyond Cooper development. Other fraudulent contractors, seeing Nathan's conviction, faced their own reckonings. The healthcare construction industry underwent systematic reform, prioritizing patient safety over profit margins. The final numbers are staggering, Caroline Martinez shared during our evening debrief. Over 200 medical facilities affected, thousands of patients endangered, billions in fraudulent contracts. But also, every danger identified, every patient protected, every facility restored. Dr. Rachel Chen brought news from the oncology department. The review of patients treated by compromised doctors had led to revised protocols. Medical professionals who had accepted kickbacks from Nathan now faced their own legal consequences, their betrayal of patient trust exposed. Looking around at the gathered medical community, doctors, nurses, administrators united in purpose, I remembered the day I discovered Nathan's betrayal. He had timed everything perfectly, thinking surgery would leave me vulnerable. Instead, it had revealed strength I never knew I possessed. The structural engineers confirmed it, Olivia reported, reviewing the latest assessments. Every seismic reinforcement has been properly installed. The hospitals Nathan tried to compromise are now the safest in their regions. Christine Walsh shared success stories from her support group. Families affected by Nathan's fraud had found healing, not just in properly maintained facilities, but in the knowledge that their experiences had helped protect future patients. Their pain had catalyzed crucial changes in healthcare safety. As the sun set behind the courthouse, casting long shadows across the steps where justice had finally been served, I felt an overwhelming sense of completion. Nathan's attempt to silence me during surgery had instead given voice to countless others who had witnessed his crimes. "Ready for tomorrow's procedures?" Dr. Foster asked, knowing my surgical schedule never stopped despite everything else. "The operating rooms are fully upgraded. Every safety measure, every monitoring system, every backup protocol in place." My phone lit up one final time. A message from the hospital board. They had unanimously approved funding for a new patient safety initiative. The program would ensure that medical facilities remained places of healing, that no contractor could ever again exploit patient vulnerability for profit. Walking away from the courthouse, I passed the cherry trees that had witnessed my journey from victim to victor. Their blossoms danced in the evening breeze, reminding me that beauty can emerge from the harshest circumstances. Nathan had planned everything meticulously: the timing of the divorce papers, the manipulation of my treatment, the systematic corruption of healthcare facilities. But he had forgotten something crucial about the medical community. We don't just treat illnesses or repair injuries. We protect, we heal, we stand together against anything that threatens patient safety. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope as I headed to Northwest Memorial for evening rounds. Tomorrow would bring new surgeries, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate that healing spaces must remain sacred. Nathan's betrayal during my surgery had tried to break me. Instead, it had forged something unbreakable: a united medical community dedicated to protecting every patient, every facility, every promise of care. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.